Hey, it's Cami! いくら英語を勉強してもなかなかスピーキングが上達しないと感じていませんか？英語を読んだり書いたりするのは得意でも、いざ会話となると、ネイティブスピーカーと会話を続けるのは難しいものです。今日はジェレミーさんに話を聞いてきました。ジェレミーさんは14年間ベルリッツで英語とドイツ語を教えており、その前はロンドンで英語の教師をしていました。スピーキングがなかなか上達しない理由と、すぐに使えるコツを教えてくれましたので、スピーキングを上達させたい方はぜひご覧ください。
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you again for joining me for another video.
My pleasure.
So today we're going to be talking about problems with speaking and why it's so hard for learners of English to actually speak well. But before we get started, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Jeremy. I was born in the UK and I grew up in English and German speaking countries, so I'm bilingual English and German. I've been a Berlitz teacher for 14 years and I teach English and German.
I know that you really have quite an interest in helping people to become confident speakers and helping learners to speak English in the easiest way possible for them. What made you become so interested in this?
Well, I found school was very difficult for me. I found it difficult to learn, especially memorize things. And I was always very jealous of other kids who could just, seem to pick things up really easily. So by the time I finished school, I really kind of hated it and decided there are two things I will never do. I will never go to university and I will never become a teacher. As fate had it, I did go to university and I did become first a music and then a language teacher. But I sort of made a promise to myself that if I did become a teacher, I wanted to focus on and help those students who didn't find it easy to study.
So I think that especially in Japan, there are a lot of people that feel that speaking is the hardest skill to master when they're learning English. And even people that can read well and write well in English can tend to struggle with speaking.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think this is in part due to the way English is taught in the school system here in Japan, where it is taught as a testable skill rather than a skill of communication. So if you study vocabulary separately from grammar, then it's easy to test the success of learning, but it doesn't drive the ability to communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, recently has been changing and the school system emphasizes communication much more than it did in the past. But I noticed this in older students, especially adults, that they have come from this fear of learning a language because, they didn't enjoy it in school and they feel they can't learn it. And overcoming that can be quite difficult sometimes.
Is there anything else that contributes to difficulty with picking up speaking? So, for example, I know that some students that I've taught they seem to be really worried about making mistakes.
That's very common, of course, yes. I think in this society, we focus far too much on I mustn't make a mistake. I need to get it right the first time. And therefore, we lose a tremendous amount of fluency and confidence.
So I know that you have a lot of experience teaching English and German, and not only in Berlitz Japan, but also other companies in Japan, as well as teaching at schools in other countries.
Hmm?
What are the typical patterns that you've noticed that makes a good English speaker?
I think those people who tend to just go for it, just want to communicate, they find it easiest to learn quickly. My experience in London was I had students from all around the world, and I found that students from Latin America, even as total beginners, would be immediately communicating with each other and other people around them. Just because they went for it, even with just 5 words, they would start talking. They would supplement a lot of it with their own language, body language, and things like that. But they would immediately be communicating. Whereas my students from Japan tended to be quiet while they were in their mind trying to string together a perfect sentence. And even though their accuracy was better, they found it much more difficult to communicate with others. Also, the willingness to engage in situations where you can use the language. Those people who tend to be afraid of making mistakes tend to hesitate and not join in whenever the situation arises, whereas those who engage and immediately start talking tend to make much more progress.
And what about on the opposite side? Did you notice any patterns with students that tend to find it difficult to learn a new language?
A lot of the time they will rely too much on translation or forming a perfect sentence before joining in, which often meant that the conversation had long moved on before they were ready to join in, and therefore they missed a lot of opportunities. I also noticed that some students will focus too much on just one method or one form of studying, which tends to get boring, and their progress will start stagnating, or their perception of it will. So having a variety of different ways of practicing certainly increases that as well.
Do you think people can still become good speakers if they don't have the opportunity to use the language in real life? Absolutely,
yes. In any form of using another language is going to help your progress, even if you are only reading, Harry Potter books, for example. You're still going to be learning a language by doing so.
So you mentioned that you had some students, for example, students from Latin America, that immediately they can start having a conversation in the target language only, and they are communicating even with their limited knowledge. And then some students, for example, students from Japan, that tended to be more quiet and they had trouble speaking, even though maybe they had high knowledge of vocabulary and grammar. I assume even now at Berlitz you deal with both types of students.
Sure.
Are there any activities that you do in class to help students become more comfortable with speaking quickly?
Sure. I like to use A++ in all lessons, and it's the idea of avoiding the interview situation where the teacher will ask, "How was your weekend?" and the student answers, "Good," and the teacher says, "What did you do?" I watched a movie, and this short question answer backwards and forwards. And A++ allows us to make a more natural sounding conversation by answering the question, adding more information, and then returning a question rather than waiting for the next question.
Okay, what does A++ look like? Can you demonstrate to me?
Sure. I can ask Cami, what did you do yesterday?
Yesterday I went out for lunch.
Where did you go?
I went to Harajuku.
Oh, did you go alone?
No, I went with a friend.
Fantastic. Okay, one more time. I went out for lunch, I went to Harajuku, and I went with my friends. Okay, One more time. Cami, what did you do yesterday?
Yesterday I went out for lunch. I went to Harajuku with my friend. Did you do anything yesterday?
Creating this backwards and forwards in a more natural conversation, and it's more focused than just general chit chat.
And it's much more natural, because in a real conversation, it would be a bit strange to just answer with yes, no, nothing.
Exactly.
I used to force myself to use A++ when I just moved to Japan, and I wanted to improve my Japanese. Every time somebody asked me a question, in my head I would always be like, answer and ask, to improve my fluency as well.
That's very good, yes.
Are there any other activities that you like to use to help people become more comfortable with speaking?
Our lessons are goal-oriented. The idea is that the student is able to complete a task or has learned a new skill by the end of the lesson. So role plays are essential for our lesson at the end, where we basically complete the situation. Whether you're buying a ticket at the station or checking in for a flight, we would conclude that with a role play at the end of each lesson.
And that's a really good way to practice using the new language without any help from the instructor, right? Almost
Yes.
like a real way.
Yes. One more thing I try and encourage students to do is to reply in full answers. So even though in a natural conversation you're more likely to just say yes or sure, we would encourage the student to repeat the full phrase. So, for example, do you like sushi? The answer then could be, yes, I do. I like sushi very much. Just gives the student another chance to repeat the full phrase, the full sentence with the correct grammar and so on. And it also gives the instructor the chance to correct word order or intonation or other things.
My next question for you is, what do you think are the do's and don'ts for studying if you want to improve your speaking skills?
Well, I think for studying anything, a big do is regular practice. I think setting aside a certain amount of time, if possible daily, to practice something will result in a much faster learning. Choosing a variety of different resources, not just a textbook, but maybe audiobooks or mobile phone apps or watching movies or films in English will help you as well. Very important, I think, is also to focus on fluency rather than accuracy, or rather than just accuracy, like we discussed earlier. And try and do it at a time when you are most relaxed. For example, when you're walking home from work, or in any situation that you find yourself most relaxed in. A very big don't would be don't translate. Don't choose materials that are too difficult for you. So, for example, don't try and read the Financial Times just because you feel that will boost your vocabulary, because you won't enjoy it and you'll lose motivation very quickly.
You mentioned don't translate. Why is don't translate important for improving your speaking skills?
Because you'll make the fastest progress, as we mentioned also in terms of fluency, if you think in the language you're speaking in. If you're translating, you're setting yourself unnecessary hurdles, and you will often use vocabulary in the wrong way, or you mean one thing, but the other person understands something completely different. So using the words that you're already familiar with is going to make it much easier to communicate effectively.
And you also mentioned for one of the do's that you should try to focus on not just on accuracy, but also on fluency. I think this is really important in terms of being able to speak quickly and respond quickly as well, and have a natural flow in a conversation. Do you have any recommendations for how to focus on fluency?
There are some activities. For example, if we have a large group, we could play a game of speed dating. where we could have two students face each other, and for a short period of time, like say 30 seconds or a minute, they have to make a conversation with each other. That could just be getting to know each other, or you could even give them a specific goal for that conversation. Time it and then move them on to the next one.
Okay, so if you were by yourself as well, like studying by yourself, it would probably be a similar thing where you could be like, I'm going to set a timer for 40 seconds and then I'm going to talk about my weekend for the whole 40 seconds, but I can't stop talking, or something like that.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, I have one last question for you. What advice do you have for people to study speaking by themselves?
Well, first of all, I think the easiest way for anyone to learn anything is by having fun. So choose things that you're actually interested in rather than what you think you should be studying. Especially in this country, a lot of people study for exams because they think like that they can prove they have actually learned something. But that's rarely fun and rarely leads to actual speaking improvement. There's many different things you could do. We already mentioned apps or textbooks, but there's also things like joining an online chat room on a topic or a subject that you're interested in. A lot of places also have local groups that meet maybe once a week or once a month to just chat to each other to improve their language. One advice I would give is when you do have the chance to speak to or listen to a native speaker, make sure to listen actively. When we don't understand, it's very easy for us to just zone out or tune out what we don't understand. So staying focused on trying to pick up as many individual words that we do understand and piece together what they might be talking about will help improve your language skill a lot as well.
Do you mean that if you are listening to a language that you're not used to, if you don't understand the first few words, your brain starts to kind of block that language out and you stop picking up what you understand?
I believe so, yes.
Those were all of my questions for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for watching, and good luck to everyone who wants to improve their speaking skills. See you in the next video.
See you.
Bye.
動画をご覧いただきありがとうございました。ベルリッツブログにもスピーキングアドバイスの記事が載っていますので、より詳しく読みたい方はぜひ参考にしてみてください。自信を持って英語を話したい方はぜひチャンネル登録をしてくださいね。バイ